Well, it's official. Adrian Newey is now an Aston Martin employee. Well, it's a little bit more than that, and it's gotten a little bit more complicated. And not to mention, Aston Martin now scare me. They scare me to my core. Also, Adrian, I dig the blue suit. Nice little nod to McLaren, and referring to Red Bull as your old team. Nice! Adrian Newey will now be a full-time technical managing partner in charge of the team itself, making his own little crew, which is presently led by Dan Fallows and Enrico Cardile, him coming from Ferrari. This supposedly being a 5-year deal with a £150 million paycheck and shares in the team. It's probably a nice little loophole to get around that pesky little cost cap, you know. Instead of giving Adrian Newey a huge lump sum which could compromise the budget for the car, just give him stock options in the team. At the same time though, I think this actually makes it into a little bit more of an interesting little arrangement that Papa Stroll and he have, and thusly I'm going to have to really whip out this little gem. By the power of hot takes, I have opinion! Put simply, Papa Stroll just gave Adrian Newey something that Red Bull wouldn't or couldn't give him, most notably something Christian Horner would never give him, a stake in the team itself. Him being part of it instead of just being an employee. What's become clear right now is that Adrian Newey is now part of Aston Martin itself, so he's not necessarily going to be just part of the F1 team. Whether or not it applies to the Aston Martin Lagonda car company, that remains to be seen, but probably. He's now been reunited with the Valkyrie project, which is something he started when Aston Martin and Red Bull were partners, even though Aston Martin had nothing to do with making the engines, which was incredibly weird itself. But then again, Aston Martin is a cool brand. It's a brand itself at large. And I think with what they're trying to do right now is make Adrian Newey part of something big, to make Aston Martin into that super brand that Ferrari is trying to be. And as a result, we might actually see Aston Martin increase in valuation. In fact, no, it already is, because Papa Stroll is selling more and more parts of the Aston Martin F1 team to outside investors, capital investment firms, which are now estimating that Aston Martin could be worth about $2 billion at this point. And that's almost as much as what McLaren is worth. That is crazy, and that terrifies me. There's no limit as to where Papa Stroll is going to go, because with Adrian right there as the technical manager, he is going to have one of the best minds in Formula One. Now, I know you're probably thinking, oh, you're just being biased because Adrian is British. Well, he's been around for a very long time, and having that experience on hand, as you now have a brand new wind tunnel, which is something, by the way, Red Bull do not have, and that is probably something of an issue that Adrian did have, because if you think about it, Red Bull have only just decided to commission a brand new wind tunnel. That won't be around until 2027 or something like that, and Adrian's probably been saying to Red Bull, why don't you get a brand new wind tunnel? We probably need it with the brand new regulations. And they've probably been thinking, well, our one's good enough, so why don't we just stick with the one that we already have? In this case, Papa Stroll saw that Adrian Newey was frustrated and basically gave him a private tour of the facility and said, whatever you want, I'll give it to you. You want to be partners? You want to have stock options in the team? Yeah, sure. Here's a 5-year deal worth $150 million. Now, yes, of course, there is a very big elephant in the room here, and that, of course, is being Lance Stroll, but we'll get to that later. But the point is, though, this arrangement is something that Red Bull could never give Adrian, and it's all to do with just having involvement, because we are going to be seeing more updates to the Aston Martin Valkyrie. That car which Aston Martin gave Fernando Alonso as a gift. We are going to be seeing Aston Martin not only dominate Formula One potentially, give it a few years, but we'll also see an updated Valkyrie in about a couple of years or so with the World Endurance Championship and Le Mans. And who knows, we might see Aston Martin partner up with Chevrolet, or even Honda actually, in Indy 500. That is something I think Papa Stroll will eventually go for in the fullness of time. Have Aston Martin win the Triple Crown, which is something that only McLaren has been able to do. And really, this is just going to be something that will make Aston Martin into a really dark, villainous empire, and that terrifies me. But I don't know whether or not that's in a bad way or in a good way, because what we're seeing right now is a really fascinating little tidbit. But there are some caveats to this though, because even though Adrian Newey is coming on board as the technical managing partner, he is not going to be the only person who is charged in designing brand new cars. Of course, he's not going to be involved in the design of the AMR25 next year. That would be a waste of his time. And besides, he's not going to be around until March the 2nd next year, which is 2 weeks before the Australian Grand Prix. And that makes me really, really happy to say that we are going to be starting the season in Melbourne again. It just feels right, you know. And you know what they say about too many cooks spoiling the broth? Well, I think that could easily happen if we get a lot of people butting heads. Because we've got to remember, Dan Fallows, at least as far as I can tell, and Enrico Cardile, they are not going to be diminished in any way. They are going to be part of the overall team, and it'll be up to Adrian Newey himself as to how it's comprised and who does what, who goes where. And all of these big names were used to being the top bananas in their respective field. Dan Fallows especially came from Red Bull to be the designer at Aston Martin, and now comes in his old boss and co-worker to then supersede him. Basically, Fallows failed in bringing Aston Martin to the top, and obviously, I think Papa Stroll thought he could get a cheaper rate by getting somebody who worked with Adrian Newey to do the job, but that didn't work, so you got to get the guy himself. Sure, it's going to cost a lot, and the team's probably going to have to refinance itself. More specifically, some of the brand new investors that have come in have been brought on to help refinance the debt that has accrued on the brand new Aston Martin factory. So there's a lot of debt going on here, so that's something to really consider as well. But I'm not entirely worried because this isn't a big Toyota problem, which is something I was really dreading, that you're going to have this big organization that throws money at problems. But the difference here, though, is that Papa Stroll has done his homework and he has been around Formula One long enough to know who is good and who isn't, and who to listen to. And also, I feel like with Adrian Newey coming on as a partner and Papa Stroll taking on more and more partners, it's diluting who actually owns the team. So now more and more people might start to, at least this is what Papa Stroll is hoping, disassociate the whole Stroll family and then just think of Aston Martin as the whole. Again, trying to pull a Ferrari. You are not bigger than it. Aston Martin is the brand and you are part of that one glorious whole. You are not above it. You are not bigger than that, which is exactly the problem that Fred Vasseur saw with Adrian Newey, potentially with a Ferrari deal. Vasseur thinks that maybe one day they might see eye to eye, but he was thinking that Newey's ideas and ambitions and desires and demands were just things that Ferrari didn't want to deal with because, again, no one is bigger than Ferrari, and for that is completely justified. Whereas with Aston Martin, it's up for debate, really. But then again, Aston Martin is a cool brand. It's always been cool since the 60s. And now it's trying to establish itself in the era of Formula One being more popular than ever. So this deal is more than just getting a guy who's really good with a pencil. When that DB9 came out in the 2000s, it reinvigorated Aston Martin as not just being this old fuddy-duddy car brand that was just so associated with James Bond. And even then it wasn't being associated with James Bond because James Bond was driving BMWs. Yes, I know you're probably going to be thinking, well, Lance Stroll is not going to give him the ambitions. And yeah, that is very true. But there was a really interesting comment that Adrian did bring up, and it did make me think, oh no, this might have something to do with money, and he's willing to look past the whole thing with Lance Stroll. It's down to the fact that he has a son, Harry, or Harrison Newey, who was driving in Formula 3 around that time, and was talking about Lance Stroll winning the F3 championship in that year, which was enough to get him the Formula 1 seat the following year. All of these announcements were made around Baku, the Azerbaijan Grand Prix. I don't know whether this was a coincidence or not, but this is probably a happy hunting ground for Papa Stroll and his boy, because this is where Lance Stroll got his first podium. And even though it was something of a little bit of a controversy for the fact that so many people dropped out that year, that's besides the point. Lance Stroll got that podium. It could have been a second place. It wasn't. Oh well, whatever. I just think it was a nice little interesting nod. It might have been a coincidence, but there are some real doubts here because, again, you've got Cardile coming in from Ferrari expecting to be a top banana. Who's to say that maybe by the end of 2026, one of those people might leave and take some people with him. And then they're going to have to find brand new replacements. And all of this money, it's going to cost. It's going to cost a lot. It is a huge, major endeavor. And granted, the supposed cost cap is going to be increasing to $220 million for 2026. That's part of the supposed Concord agreement. I'm sure some teams might like that. Other teams might not, most notably the smaller teams. I think Williams might be a little bit hard done by. unless they start to do well with Carlos Sainz, of course. But the fact is, though, is that there are lots and lots of questions still to be had with this arrangement. Adrian Newey being part of this team, fantastic, cool. I'm glad he's still passionate about Formula One, because there was quite a long period after Red Bull fell down with Renault in 2014 where he just felt disillusioned. Now he's got the spark back again. He's going to go on holiday, he'll be motivated when he comes back in March, he might produce some really good work. But again, it's all dependent on many other things coming together, and whether or not he actually gets along with Cardile, Fallows, and other people that he decides to bring along. That's the thing. That's not a guarantee, because sure, whether or not there's a contract thing in all of the different Red Bull engineers, or whether Christian Horner even thought that this could happen, who's to say that Adrian Newey might just go up to people at Red Bull and go, hey, why don't you come and work with me, or something like that? Sure, there might be some gardening leave issues, there might not be. If they're junior enough, or they're not significant, that's something to consider. Red Bull might fall down even more. More people might decide to come from other teams to want to work with Adrian Newey. It's why I think Fernando Alonso has stuck around for so long, because this is something, as Papa Stroll said, he's been trying for at least 3 years to get Adrian Newey to come along. And you can tell that Fernando Alonso is coping, because he got 11th place and he just comes into the media pen of the previous Grand Prix on a scooter. That's just like, this is his way of coping and just knowing, hey, things are going to look up eventually, so I may as well just smile. I'm just going to stick around for a little bit longer. And then the whole thing with Lance Stroll, I don't know what's going to happen if, for example, Adrian Newey pulls out a banger of a car in the AMR 26 or the AMR 27, because that's another thing to consider. Many of these people I saw in the chat for the live stream and the announcement were thinking, Alonso's going to win his 33rd Grand Prix in 2025. No, it's going to take a long time for this to really filter in. And who's to say whether or not Adrian will get all of his ideas onto paper? Because again, there are going to be really big names here working together. They are going to have their say. They're going to have their wants on the car, their requests, whether or not they actually synergize when they sit down, because Adrian hasn't started work yet. He can't start work until next March, whereas Cardile might be able to start a little bit sooner. Fallows is already there. He'll have things established. Cardile will have his own ideas. They might not work with Adrian's ideas. They might butt heads. They might clash. One of them might even just decide, you know what, I don't like this guy, I'm just gonna leave. It's going to take at least 3 years to see any noticeable improvement. Sure, 2026 might expedite that a little bit, but who's to say that another team might not get it even better? Mercedes might get it better. McLaren might get it better. Aston Martin might be okay. It might be alright, but that's not a guarantee. The entire hierarchy could change overnight. Red Bull might be last, or might be back exactly to where it was in 2005 before Adrian Newey came along. And even though the team has said repeatedly that, oh, we'll be fine, he's not replaceable, and Horner and Pierre Vacher have constantly downplayed Adrian ever since he made the decision after the Japanese Grand Prix, surprisingly, to then decide just call it quits with Red Bull, which arguably, I think that package for Suzuka was the last upgrade that actually worked as intended for Red Bull. It just feels like Red Bull are trying to just snuff some copium and just think, it'll be fine, it'll be okay, we've got a team that Adrian built, we've got all of these junior talents that learned under Newey, we've got Vacher here who learned especially under Adrian, it's going to be okay, it's going to be okay, it's going to be okay! The fact of the matter is, though, and this is a comment that Adrian did make, and he made a lot in his own book, and in the Growing Wings Red Bull book, The History of Red Bull, Adrian brought this up as well in the original discussions with Dietrich Mateschitz, that it pays to pay a lot, and Adrian was very happy that Aston Martin was prepared to splash out the cash for not only himself, a brand new wind tunnel, which is something that Adrian has never had at Red Bull, so that is going to be a nice little treat, a nice little toy for him to play along with, and also, it just feels like there's a lot more opportunities. This is another ground-up project, and as I said in a previous video, I think I mentioned it the other day, that Adrian Newey left teams when things just started to go wrong and politics got in the way. And whether or not he might stick out these 5 years at Aston Martin remains to be seen. There could be internal politics at play. Some other people in the organisation might want to try and usurp the likes of Newey in some way, or undermine him, even though he's meant to be the manager. And then Adrian might decide that he doesn't like this, he's going to take the check and then leave. Because a lot of people are thinking, this is a really sad way to end your massive career, Adrian. You're going to a team whose sole purpose, as said by Mike Cragg, is to ensure that Lance Stroll has a long career within Formula One and make sure that he wins the World Championship. You're really going to a place like that, people say? And this is a major issue and a thorn in the likes of Aston Martin's partners Aramco and Honda's side, is that they want to win the constructors as well. They want the championships as quickly as possible. They might be able to do that with Fernando if he sticks around and he remains just as sharp as he is now. And even though Lance Stroll is still in his mid-20s, even though he's got over 150 Grand Prix under his belt, there's not been any real sign of improvement. And this is something I noticed last year. The more attention that Lance gets and the more pressure that goes on his shoulders, the worse he's able to handle it. And we saw him buckle like in no other season in 2023, to the point where you saw the thing that happened in Qatar. I won't bore you with the details, you can look it up at this point. And who's to say that in 2026, Race 1, the Australian Grand Prix, people are thinking this is an Adrian Newey designed car. Honda is their power unit supplier. Aramco gives them the fuels that they have been investing billions and billions of dollars into. Surely we are going to see a Aston Martin 1-2 or something, and then supposedly, oh, Lance Stroll can barely make it into Q3, or oh, he can't make the top 5, whereas Fernando is 3rd or 2nd, or he gets pole. We don't know. But if Lance Stroll is not able to actually do the job and not get the results that Aston Martin's partners expect, it's going to be a very awkward season. Adrian Newey wants success. And okay, who knows? Maybe Adrian is able to talk to Lance and ask exactly what he requires to be able to drive at his best, and we might see the perfect synergy that has eluded Lance for all of this time. We might do. We might actually see somebody who's paying attention to Stroll, and we might see his best. We might not see his best. We might see everyone just going, oh, he's just going to prioritise Fernando, because that's been a long dream that he and Fernando have had to work together, but it's eluded them. He went to McLaren, Fernando, and just missed out on Adrian, who left at the end of 2005. There might have been some traits of Neweyisms in the MP422 that Fernando drove, but the fact is, though, it wasn't a fully fledged Adrian car, and now Fernando gets to live the dream. Fernando brings a lot of recognition to the brand, especially on TikTok, because everyone's thinking, wow, here's this guy nearly in his mid-40s who just simply gets memery. Whereas Lance, he's relatively quiet. And I don't think you need me to tell you what the internet thinks about Lance Stroll, because I think it's been done to death at this point. But the fact of the matter is, though, is that Aston Martin is really starting to scare me, not only in the fact that they've got so much money to throw at the likes of Adrian Newey and other people and other facilities and other ways of getting brand recognition out there to improve the brand and not only try and instill more energy into the F1 team itself, but as well as the car company itself, because I bet you that Adrian is not going to be just designing F1 cars. He'll be doing the Valkyrie, he might do a couple of road cars, because heck, Adrian owns a couple of classic Aston Martin cars. He'll want to have his own say as well, and make sure that he and Fernando produce another hypercar or a supercar or even just a GT cruiser that both of them can market the ever-living daylights out of. You know it's gonna happen. Yeah, you could say it is about the money. Adrian Newey is going to be a multi-millionaire at this point, and he's now just capping off his career at a British team, which is something he's been at pretty much his entire career. They've always been based in the UK, which is something that makes me think, why would that Ferrari deal even work? Because he even said that he didn't want to relocate to Italy because it would be complicated. And Rory Byrne didn't even work in Italy. He worked remotely, and that was back in the times when you didn't have email. That just made things all the more complicated. The purpose of getting Newey is to have him instilled as an employee and shareholder and partner of where Aston Martin is going to go. I thought this press conference was going to be Papa Stroll showing off, and instead of being extremely angry, Papa Stroll would have then said, I am extremely happy about this arrangement. In fact, I gave Adrian Newey an offer he could not refuse. But it's more than that. He is turning Aston Martin into a team and a brand that can run itself, that has barely any recognition with Papa Stroll and the Stroll family itself, and I think he recognises that the Stroll name does have some negative connotations about it. So instead of just making it all about Papa Stroll and Lance Stroll, really play to its strengths elsewhere. Aston Martin, the brand itself, Formula One, Honda, Aramco, Adrian Newey, Enrico Cardile, all of these different personalities. Play on more Fernando, maybe even get some more people in. I don't know. But the fact is, though, you are going to have a top-notch team, and therefore, Papa Stroll can slowly sell off more and more of the team. He can then go into the background. He's just that silent guy in the corner. And if Lance Stroll is able to get the results, then he'll get more positive headlines. That's the idea. But it's nowhere near simply saying it's Papa Stroll's team, as it was back in 2018 when he bought it from Vijay Mallya and Force India. It's gotten way bigger than that. And fair play. They've managed to turn that team, who was always seen as a bunch of minnows punching above their weight, which was a nice little plucky attitude and personality and something was very endearing, into a proper mega team with brand new facilities, and they've been able to catch Red Bull napping. And I just feel like Red Bull's hubris has really now come to roost with the fact that they don't have a brand new wind tunnel, whereas all of the other competitors that they have one. And they're not going to have this problem solved for many months at this point. They are losing resources from next year's car, and they're not going to have that brand new one until about a few years' time. And Max Verstappen may not even be in Formula One anymore. He might even be at Aston Martin. It's absolutely crazy we've even got to this point, and I appreciate you listening to my rambling, and if you have, be sure to like and subscribe for more of these ramblings that you might be able to find the likes of here, for example, where I think that Red Bull have practically given up on 2024, and Max is not happy about it whatsoever. So go and watch this video next for the full details about that.